Admiral stood on the bridge of the orbital command station, staring at the screen before him. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his hands gripped the railing tightly. The objects appearing on the radar were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. 300 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel just beyond Earth's moon. They were massive, each one dwarfing the largest human battleship. Their hulls gleamed with a dark purple metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The ships arranged themselves in a perfect grid pattern, blocking out the stars behind them. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," the communications officer said. Her voice trembled slightly. "Put it on screen," replied. The image that appeared made several crew members gasp. The creature was enormous, standing at least 9 feet tall. Its body was covered in dark scales that shifted colors like oil on water. 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on its elongated head stared directly into the camera. When it spoke, the words came through in perfect human language, though the voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "I am ambassador of the Dominion. For 10,000 of your years, we have ruled this galaxy. 3,000 species kneel before our emperor. You will be the 3,001st. Felt his jaw tight, but he remained silent, listening. "You have 72 of your hours to surrender completely. Dismantle your weapons. Submit your leaders for processing. Accept our rule. If you comply, your species will be allowed to continue existing under our guidance. If you refuse—" The alien paused, and something that might have been a smile crossed its face. "No species has ever refused. You will not be the first." The transmission ended. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet beeping of computers. "Get me the World Council," said quietly. "Now." Within an hour, the emergency meeting had convened. Leaders from every nation on Earth appeared on screens in the secure conference room deep beneath Geneva. Admiral attended remotely from the orbital station. Also present was Director, head of Earth's diplomatic corps, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had negotiated peace treaties across every continent. "We need to consider our options carefully," said the Secretary General, a tired-looking man who seemed to have aged 10 years in the past hour. "Their fleet is massive. Our intelligence suggests each of those ships carries weapons that could destroy a city." "We should respond diplomatically," said, leaning forward. "Request more time. Try to understand what they want beyond simple submission. Perhaps we can negotiate terms." "There are no terms," interrupted. His voice was firm. "I've read the historical databases they transmitted. They don't negotiate. They conquer. Every species they've encountered has either surrendered immediately or been wiped out completely." "Then what choice do we have?" asked the representative from the Eastern Coalition. "We have 47 ships against their 300. Our weapons are primitive compared to theirs. Fighting would be suicide." Stood up from his chair. "Maybe, but I've been a soldier for 40 years. I've studied every war humanity has ever fought. And I can tell you one thing: the moment we kneel, we stop being human. We become whatever they want us to be." "That's easy for you to say from a military perspective," another representative argued. "But we're talking about the survival of our entire species. 8 billion lives. Can you take responsibility for all those deaths if we fight and lose? Can you take responsibility for enslaving them if we surrender?" Shot back. The argument continued for hours. Tried to maintain order, but the representatives were terrified and angry. Some wanted to fight. Others insisted surrender was the only rational choice. A few suggested trying to flee, loading colony ships and running to another part of the galaxy. "They'd catch us," said flatly. "Their ships are faster than ours. There's nowhere to run." As the debate raged, a young officer approached with a data pad. Captain was only 32, the youngest ship commander in the fleet, known for his brilliant tactical mind. He commanded the UDS Resilience, humanity's and most advanced warship. "Sir, I've been analyzing their fleet formation," said quietly. "They're arranged in a ceremonial pattern. Perfect spacing, geometric precision. It's beautiful, but it's not tactical. Raised an eyebrow. Go on. They've never lost a battle, sir. Not in 10,000 years. That means they've never had to adapt. They fight the same way every time because it always works. But look, he pointed to the data on his screen. Their formation has gaps, places where their overlapping fire coverage is weak. They're not expecting resistance. Of course they're not, said. No one's ever given them any. Met his admiral's eyes. Maybe it's time someone did. Meanwhile, in a civilian research facility in Seoul, engineer Minyu was having a very different kind of revelation. He had spent 15 years studying a piece of alien technology that crashed in the Pacific Ocean decades ago. At the time, no one knew what it was. Now, looking at the scans of the ships, he realized it had been one of their probes. Minyu pulled up his old research files and began cross-referencing them with the new data. His hands moved faster and faster across the keyboard as connections formed in his mind. The shields operated on principles of energy dispersion. They could absorb and redirect any energy-based attack, no matter how powerful. But the probe's shielding had failed when it hit the ocean, not from the impact with the water itself, but from the physical mass of water hitting it at high velocity. His eyes widened. He grabbed his phone and started making calls. Back at the World Council meeting, the vote was finally called. Surrender or fight. The room fell silent as each representative cast their decision. The tally appeared on the screen. It was close, frighteningly close. But the final count showed a narrow majority for one option. The Secretary General took a deep breath. The decision is made. Director, prepare a response to the Dominion. Nodded slowly. Her hands were shaking slightly as she opened the communication channel to the alien fleet. She had drafted 2 speeches, one for each possible outcome. She looked down at the paper before her and began to read. Ambassador of the Dominion, she said clearly, we have considered your ultimatum carefully. Humanity has faced extinction many times in our history. We have survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and our own ignorance. We have always found a way to continue, and we have learned one thing above all others. She paused, gathering her courage. We do not kneel. Our answer is no. The transmission ended. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, all 300 ships began to glow with an angry red light. On the orbital command station, Admiral allowed himself the smallest smile. All ships, he said calmly into his command channel, prepare for battle. Show them what humans do when someone tries to take away our freedom. In orbit and on the ground, across every continent and on every ship, humanity prepared for war. They knew the odds. They knew they might lose, but they also knew they would not surrender. The 72 hours had become 71. The countdown to humanity's last stand had begun. The fleet remained motionless for 12 hours after receiving humanity's refusal. On Earth, people waited in terror and hope. In those 12 hours, the world transformed. Families retreated to underground shelters built decades ago during the nuclear age. Cities that once glowed with lights went dark as power was redirected to military installations. Factories that made cars and computers retooled to produce ammunition and armor. Humanity had made its choice, and now every person on Earth prepared to live or die by it. On the flagship, Fleet Commander paced his command chamber. He was ancient even by standards, having commanded fleets for over 1,000 years. His scales were a deep, dark purple that marked him as nobility. His 4 eyes blinked in a pattern that showed his confusion and growing anger. They said no, he repeated for the 5th time. They actually said no. Perhaps they do not understand the consequences, suggested one of his subordinates, a younger named. They are a primitive species. They may not comprehend our power. His tail lashed in irritation. Then we will teach them. We will destroy their orbital defense stations. Once they see our weapons in action, they will beg to surrender. Should we not simply annihilate them, Commander? Asked. The Emperor's orders were clear. Any resistance is to be crushed completely. No, said, settling into his command throne. I want them to live with their mistake. I want the survivors to tell their children about the day they the Dominion. It will serve as a lesson for the next 1,000 years. On the orbital command station, Admiral received an urgent call from the surface. Engineer Minu appeared on screen, his face streaked with sweat despite the cool temperature of his laboratory. Admiral, I think I found something, Minu said quickly. The shields, they're designed to stop energy weapons. Lasers, plasma, particle beams, anything that uses energy. But human weapons are different. We still use kinetic projectiles at scale, bullets, missiles. Leaned forward. You're saying their shields won't stop physical objects. I'm saying they might not be calibrated for it, Minu replied. The probe I've been studying for 15 years had shields that failed when it hit the ocean, not from heat or energy, but from the physical impact of water traveling at high speed. If their shields are designed to deflect energy, they might not handle mass the same way. Might not, pressed. I can't be certain without testing it, Minu admitted. But it's the only advantage I can find. Every other system they have is superior to ours. Nodded slowly. Then we'll test it. Send your data to all ship commanders immediately. In another part of the planet, Doctor worked in her laboratory surrounded by biological samples and alien DNA data that they had transmitted as part of their demands. She was one of the few humans who had studied alien life forms from the few probes humanity had encountered over the decades. She stared at the genetic structure on her screen and noticed something unusual. Their cells had evolved in a low-gravity environment with a very stable atmosphere. The data suggested there had pressure levels significantly lower than Earth's. Interesting, she muttered, making notes. They're adapted for thin air and low pressure. How do they handle rapid changes? She ran simulations, modeling what might happen to biology if exposed to sudden pressure differences. The results made her eyes widen. She immediately sent her findings to the military command. At a small air base in the mountains, Lieutenant climbed into her fighter cockpit. She was 26 years old and had logged more flight hours than pilots twice her age. Her reputation was simple. She never followed the rules and she never lost. All fighters ready for launch, her squadron leader reported. Checked her weapons systems. 6 missiles, 2 pods, and 1 nuclear-tipped warhead that made her uncomfortable every time she thought about it. Earth's nuclear weapons had been decommissioned for peaceful energy production decades ago. But in the past 12 hours, some had been hastily converted back into weapons. Remember the plan, her commander said over the radio. We're not trying to win a dogfight. We're trying to survive long enough to make them bleed. Understood, replied. But in her mind she was already planning her own approach. Survival was good. Making them bleed was better. Making them regret coming to Earth would be best. The alert came at hour 71. The fleet began moving. All ships battle stations, Admiral commanded. His voice carried across every human vessel in orbit. This is it. Remember, we're not fighting to win. We're fighting to show them that humans don't break. Whatever happens today, make sure they remember us. The human fleet consisted of 47 ships. 20 were military vessels, ranging from massive carriers to small corvettes. The rest were converted civilian ships, mining vessels with welded armor, colony transports carrying soldiers, even a luxury cruise liner that had been turned into a missile platform. Against them came the organized perfection of the fleet. 300 ships moved in exact formation, their spacing precise to the centimeter. It was beautiful and terrifying. Captain stood on the bridge of the Resilience, watching the enemy approach. His ship was humanity's design, built with experimental weapons and enhanced engines. If Minu's theory was correct, the Resilience would be the one to prove it. Range in 3 minutes, his tactical officer reported. "Prepare batteries," ordered. "Set targeting solutions for rapid-fire pattern. Ignore their shields completely and aim for hull impact." The crew exchanged glances. Ignoring enemy shields went against every tactical doctrine they'd learned. But these were new rules for a new kind of war. They opened fire first. Beams of purple energy lanced across space, striking Earth's orbital defense stations. The station's shields held for 3 seconds before collapsing. The energy beams cut through metal and concrete like a knife through paper. 5 stations exploded in brilliant fireballs. Admiral watched his defenses die and forced himself to remain calm. "All ships, execute scatter pattern 7, make them chase us." The human fleet broke apart in what looked like pure panic. Ships fled in every direction, their movements erratic and desperate. The fleet pursued in perfect formation, their ships moving as one coordinated unit. "They are fleeing as expected," Fleet Commander observed with satisfaction. "Destroy them systematically, demonstrate our superiority." But Admiral was counting on this contempt. As the enemy ships broke formation slightly to pursue different human vessels, they created tiny gaps in their overlapping coverage, exactly as Captain had predicted. Now whispered. The Resilience had appeared to flee like the others, but Captain had been performing a different maneuver entirely. His ship executed a full reverse burn, using every thruster to bring the massive vessel to a complete stop in space. The laws of motion meant the pursuing cruisers couldn't stop as quickly. They overshot the human ship by several kilometers. For a brief moment, the Resilience hung motionless behind 3 cruisers. "Fire everything," commanded. The spoke, tungsten rounds accelerated to 40% of light speed. Each projectile carried more kinetic energy than a small nuclear bomb. They crossed the distance to the ships in microseconds. The enemy shields flickered, trying to disperse energy that wasn't there. The rounds passed through the shields as if they didn't exist and struck the hulls with devastating force. The first cruiser split in half, its structural integrity failing instantly. The second lost its entire command section. The third tumbled out of control, atmosphere venting from dozens of holes. On the flagship, every officer froze in shock. Commander stared at his screens in disbelief. They damaged us," he whispered. "How?" Before anyone could answer, more reports flooded in. Human ships across the battlefield were using the same tactic. Missiles, even old-fashioned explosive shells, were punching through shields. The energy-based defenses that had protected them for 10,000 years were useless against simple mass traveling at high velocity. "All ships defensive formation," roared. "Adapt shield frequencies." "Sir, the shields can't adapt to kinetic weapons," reported. "They're not energy-based. Our shields were never designed for this type of attack." Lieutenant watched the strikes from her fighter and grinned. "Looks like the big guns work. Time for the little ones." She led her squadron through the debris field of destroyed orbital stations, using the wreckage as cover. Her fighter was tiny compared to the massive capital ships, barely a speck on enemy sensors. They had been ignoring the fighters entirely, considering them no threat. That was a mistake. Squadron carried nuclear missiles, primitive weapons that they hadn't even considered dangerous. She armed hers and locked onto a carrier that was launching its own fighter craft. "For Earth," she whispered and fired. The missile streaked across space, its relatively slow speed making it seem harmless. The point defense systems didn't even activate. Why waste shots on such a weak weapon? The missile passed through their shields and detonated directly against the carrier's launch bay. The nuclear explosion tore through the carrier's interior. Secondary explosions followed as the ship's ammunition and fuel reserves ignited. Within seconds, the massive vessel was breaking apart. All across the battlefield, human fighters were doing the same thing. Missiles that they had dismissed as primitive were finding their targets. Ships were dying. Fleet Commander finally understood the truth. These humans fought in ways that made no sense. They used crude weapons. They broke formation. They rammed damaged ships into enemy vessels. They violated every rule of civilized warfare. And they were winning. Full assault, commanded, rage overwhelming his tactical judgment. Destroy them all, no survivors. But the order came too late. Humanity had already learned this weakness, and in war, knowledge was the deadliest weapon of all. The battle raged for 18 hours without pause. Space around Earth became a graveyard of shattered vessels from both sides. Debris tumbled through vacuum, glowing with heat from weapons fire and explosions. The beautiful formation of the fleet had dissolved into chaos. Captain watched his tactical display with grim satisfaction. The Resilience had taken heavy damage. Its port side was torn open. Life support was failing in 3 sections, and the main reactor was running at dangerous levels. But the ship was still fighting, and that was what mattered. Enemy cruiser at bearing 270, his tactical officer called out. They're targeting our damaged section. Roll ship 30 degrees, commanded. Present our armored belly, charge battery 3. The Resilience rotated slowly, its damaged hull groaning with the stress. The cruiser fired, purple energy beams splashing against the thicker armor on the ship's underside. The shields flickered but held, barely. Battery charged, weapons control reported. Fire. 3 tungsten rounds punched through space. 2 missed as the ship maneuvered, but the third struck true. The round tore through the enemy vessel's engineering section. The ship didn't explode, it simply went dark, power failing as its reactor shut down. Another one dead, muttered, but there was no joy in his voice. He'd lost 60% of his crew already. The survivors were exhausted, running on adrenaline and determination alone. Across the battlefield, Admiral coordinated the defense from what remained of the orbital command station. 2/3 of the station was gone, destroyed in the initial assault. He commanded from an emergency bunker deep in the structure's core, surrounded by flickering screens and damaged equipment. Status report, he demanded. 12 human ships still operational, the tactical officer replied. Her young face was streaked with soot from a fire they'd extinguished an hour ago. 7 more are heavily damaged but can still fight. The rest are either destroyed or disabled. And we count 262 enemy ships still active, 38 confirmed destroyed or disabled. Allowed himself a moment of surprise. 38. Humanity had killed 38 warships. No species in galactic history had ever achieved such a feat. But the cost was terrible. 28 human ships destroyed, thousands of crew members dead, and the still had overwhelming numbers. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the flagship, communications reported. Put it through. Fleet Commander appeared on the screen. His scales were darker than before, a sign of extreme anger in physiology. 3 of his 4 eyes were bloodshot. You have fought well for primitives, said, his grinding voice filled with rage. But this ends now. Surrender immediately and I will spare your civilian population. Stared at the alien commander. He thought about the thousands who had already died. He thought about the families hiding in shelters, terrified and waiting. He thought about what surrender would mean, generations of humans living under rule, their freedom gone forever. No, said simply. His eyes widened in disbelief. You cannot win. We still outnumber you 12-1. Maybe, replied. But you came here expecting us to kneel after the first shot. You thought we'd break. You were wrong. Every ship you lose proves you're not invincible. Every hour we survive shows the galaxy that they can bleed. Even if we die today, that message will spread to every species you've conquered. Then you choose extinction, snarled. We choose freedom, corrected. There's a difference. The transmission ended. Within minutes, the fleet renewed its assault with terrifying intensity. In her damaged fighter, Lieutenant barely dodged another energy beam. Her squadron had started with 24 fighters. Now only 6 remained, limping through space on failing engines. Her missile racks were empty. One of her pods was destroyed, but she was still flying, and that meant she could still fight. "All fighters converge on Rally Point Delta," her squadron leader ordered. "We're falling back to rearm." "Negative," responded. "I still have 1 pod and full ammunition." "Lieutenant, you can't make a difference with 1 gun." Watched as a destroyer targeted a human cargo ship that had been converted into a troop transport. The transport's shields were down. It carried 2,000 evacuated civilians who had been pulled from endangered orbital colonies. "Watch me," she said, cutting off the command channel. Her fighter was tiny, barely the size of a bus, but it was fast and maneuverable in ways the massive ships couldn't match. She pushed her engines to maximum, diving toward the enemy destroyer. The ship's point defense systems activated, firing streams of energy at her. Rolled and twisted, her fighter dancing between the deadly beams. Her proximity alarms screamed as she passed within meters of the enemy hull. She fired her remaining directly at the destroyer's main weapon port. The small caliber rounds wouldn't destroy the ship, but they didn't need to. They punched into the weapon assembly, causing a chain reaction of explosions that disabled the destroyer's primary armament. The cargo ship limped away to safety. Fighter tumbled through space, engines dead from the strain, but she smiled as her emergency beacon activated. She had bought those 2,000 people a few more minutes of life. Maybe that would be enough. Deep beneath Seoul, engineer Minyu worked frantically in his laboratory. The battle above was going badly, and he knew it. Humanity's kinetic weapons were effective, but they were running out of ammunition. Once the rounds were exhausted, this numerical advantage would crush the remaining human ships. He needed a new weapon, something they wouldn't expect, something they couldn't counter. His eyes fell on Doctor's biological analysis of the species. The information about their sensitivity to pressure changes gave him an idea. It was desperate and possibly insane, but desperate times called for insane solutions. He grabbed his communication device. "Admiral, this is Minyu. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." "I don't like anything about this situation," responded. "What do you have?" "The evolved in low-pressure, low-gravity environments. Their ships maintain similar conditions. If we could cause rapid pressure changes in their vessels, breaches that don't completely destroy them but compromise their hull integrity, their crews wouldn't be able to handle it." "How do we do that with the weapons we have left?" "We don't try to destroy their ships," Minyu explained. "We try to punch small holes in them, lots of small holes, use them for precision strikes on specific weak points." Doctor's analysis identified several areas in their hull design where structural support is minimal. "Consider this. We'd need to get close. Precision targeting at long range is impossible with our damaged systems." "I know," Minyu said quietly. "I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer." "It's still better than nothing. Send the targeting data to all remaining ships." As the new strategy was implemented, something unexpected happened. A communication came through on frequencies that humanity had never used before. It was alien, but not. Director received the message at the emergency government bunker. She listened to the automated translation, her eyes widening with each word. "This is the collective to the human defenders. We have monitored your battle. Your courage honors all who resist. We can provide no ships, but we offer knowledge. Attached are weak points in ship design. We learned these through centuries of occupation. Fight well." The transmission ended, but it was followed by another. And another. Species from across the galaxy were reaching out, sending tactical data, words of encouragement, information about weaknesses. They couldn't help directly, that would punish them for open rebellion, but they could give humanity the knowledge to fight more effectively. immediately forwarded all the data to Admiral. "It's working," she said to the other government officials in the bunker. "We're not just fighting for Earth anymore. The whole galaxy is watching. Every species that have conquered is hoping we win." "But can we?" someone asked. Looked at the tactical displays showing the ongoing battle. Humans were outnumbered and exhausted, but they were still fighting. "I don't know," she admitted. "But whether we win or lose, we've already changed everything. This reputation for invincibility is broken. That's something no one else has managed in 10,000 years." In space, Captain received the new targeting data from both Menu and the alien allies. He studied the information about ship weak points and formulated a new attack plan. "All remaining ships, this is new targeting protocols. We're going for precision strikes, not kill shots. Our goal is to disable their ships and force their crews to evacuate. Their biology can't handle rapid pressure loss. Make them abandon their vessels." The human fleet, battered but unbroken, adapted once again. Fire became more precise, targeting the specific hull sections identified in the data. Missiles were programmed to detonate near critical points rather than trying for direct hits. The ships began to suffer from internal failures. Crew members collapsed as pressure systems failed. Ships became disabled not from catastrophic damage, but from multiple small breaches that overwhelmed their life support systems. Fleet Commander watched in growing horror as his fleet's effectiveness degraded. His ships were dying not in glorious explosions, but in slow, methodical dismantling. The humans were targeting weaknesses he didn't even know existed. "How do they know our design flaws?" he demanded. "Our ships are classified technology." No one had an answer, but the truth was spreading through command. Somehow, the humans had allies. The conquered species were helping them. The Dominion's subjects were rebelling in the only way they could, by sharing knowledge with those brave enough to fight. As the 18th hour of battle approached, both fleets were exhausted. The still had superior numbers, but their perfect formations were shattered. Human forces were barely functional, held together by determination and desperation. Then something unexpected happened. The fleet began to withdraw. "Sir, enemy ships are pulling back," the tactical officer reported in disbelief. "They're retreating to a position beyond the moon." Admiral watched the withdrawal with cautious relief. "They're regrouping. They'll be back." But for the moment, the battle had paused. Humanity had survived the first engagement. The message from the galaxy's conquered species continued to arrive, and Fleet Commander, alone in his command chamber, realized that this small, stubborn species had just accomplished something terrifying. They had given hope to the hopeless, and hope, knew, was the most dangerous weapon in the universe. The news of Earth's battle spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. On 1,000 conquered worlds, species that had lived under rule for centuries gathered around communication devices, watching in stunned silence as the impossible unfolded. The humans had not surrendered, the humans had fought, and most importantly, the humans had made the bleed. On a planet of vast oceans and floating cities, the Elder Council met in secret. They had been conquered 200 years ago. Their own rebellion had lasted only 3 days before they crushed them completely. "The humans destroyed 38 ships," Elder Myra said, her webbed hands trembling. 38. We destroyed only 2 before surrendering." "Should we send more information?" another elder asked. "Yes," Myra decided. "Everything we have. Ship designs, tactical patterns, weapon specifications. If the humans can actually hurt the Dominion, then we must give them every advantage." Similar conversations happened across the galaxy. Though a species of insect-like beings who had been conquered 400 years ago transmitted detailed intelligence about supply lines. The silicon-based life forms enslaved for 6 centuries sent data about ship manufacturing processes. All of it flowed toward Earth, where Ambassador coordinated the incoming information. He had been a diplomat before the invasion, specializing in first contact protocols. Now he found himself as the liaison between humanity and an underground network of alien resistance that had existed in secret for generations. "We're receiving more transmissions," his assistant reported. "This one from a species called the... They're offering medical data about biology." Downloaded the information and immediately sent it to Doctor. The data was extensive, compiled over centuries by enslaved species who had been forced to serve masters. It contained details about weaknesses, diseases, biological vulnerabilities, everything the conquered species had learned through careful observation. Doctor studied the medical files with intense focus. They had powerful immune systems, capable of fighting off most pathogens. But the data showed they had no resistance to certain types of chemical compounds, specifically, some gases that were common in Earth's atmosphere but rare on worlds. She immediately began synthesizing weaponized versions of these compounds. They wouldn't kill, though, but they would severely impair their combat effectiveness. Meanwhile, in the capital, millions of light years from Earth, Emperor received the news of the battle with cold fury. He was ancient beyond measure, having ruled the Dominion for over 3,000 years. His scales were pure white, a color only the imperial bloodline could achieve. "Has failed," he said to his council. "A primitive species has humiliated our fleet." "They have alien assistance," one advisor noted carefully. "The conquered species are helping them." "I am aware," replied, his 4 eyes narrowing. "This is not just a military failure. This is a threat to our entire structure of power. If one species can resist successfully, others will follow. We must make an example of Earth that will terrify the galaxy for the next 1,000 years." He turned to his supreme military commander. "Dispatch the Second Fleet, 500 ships under the command of Warlord. I want Earth reduced to ash. I want humanity erased so completely that future species will forget they ever existed." The commander bowed. "It will be done, Emperor." On Earth, the brief respite from battle allowed humanity to assess their situation. The news was grim. Admiral reviewed the casualty reports with a heavy heart. 12 functional ships remained. 7 more could fight but were heavily damaged. Over 15,000 military personnel had died. The orbital infrastructure that humanity had spent decades building was mostly destroyed. But they had survived, and they had learned. Captain supervised repairs on the Resilience. The ship's hull was patched with whatever materials they could salvage from destroyed vessels. Half the crew were wounded. The main reactor was unstable, but the still worked, and that was enough. Lieutenant had been rescued from her dead fighter and returned to base. Despite her injuries, she immediately volunteered to fly again. Her squadron leader tried to make her rest, but she refused. "There are still people up there who need protecting," she said simply. "I can still fly, so I'll fly." In his underground laboratory, engineer Minu worked on reverse engineering more technology from the damaged ships they had recovered. One prize was particularly valuable, a partially intact shield generator pulled from a disabled cruiser. "If we can understand how their shields work," he explained to his team, "we might be able to generate our own version. Not as powerful, but enough to give our ships better protection." The work was difficult and dangerous. The alien technology operated on principles that didn't match human physics, but Minu had spent 15 years studying alien artifacts. If anyone could crack the technology, it was him. General, commander of Earth's ground forces, prepared for a different kind of battle. He watched the tactical projections and came to an uncomfortable conclusion. "They're going to send ground troops," he told Director. "The next fleet won't just bombard us from orbit. They'll want to conquer Earth completely, to show they can take our world even after we resisted." "Can we stop them?" asked. Considered the question carefully. "Not conventionally. They are bigger, stronger, and better armed, but they've never fought a guerrilla war. They've never had to occupy a hostile planet where every civilian is a potential threat. "You're talking about turning Earth into a war zone," said quietly. "Earth already is a war zone," replied. "The question is whether we fight smart or we fight traditionally and lose. I say we use every advantage we have. We know this planet. We know how to hide, how to ambush, how to make every street and every building a battlefield." Made the difficult decision. Prepare the civilian population. Anyone who wants to fight will be armed and trained. Those who don't will be evacuated to the deepest shelters we have. Across Earth, the military distributed weapons to civilian volunteers. Factories produced millions of rifles, grenades, and improvised explosives. Cities were fortified with hidden bunkers and defensive positions. Humanity was preparing for a ground war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral made a decision that surprised many. He ordered a broadcast to be sent across the galaxy, not just to those but to every species that could receive it. "People of the galaxy," he said, standing amid the ruins of his command station. "This is Admiral of Earth's United Defense Fleet. You've watched us fight the Dominion. You've seen us survive against impossible odds. I want you to know why we fight. We fight because we believe freedom is worth more than life. We fight because no one has the right to make others kneel. We fight because someone has to show the bullies of the universe that resistance is possible. To the species living under rule, we see you. We know you've helped us in secret. Your tactical data has saved lives. Your courage in risking punishment to aid us has given us strength. You are not alone. Whether we win or lose this battle, we have proven that they can be hurt. Remember that. Use that knowledge. To the Empire, you came here expecting an easy victory. You thought we would surrender at the first show of force. You were wrong about humanity. We don't know how to quit. Every ship you lose, every soldier who falls, every day you spend fighting us is a day you're not conquering someone else. We will make this the most expensive victory in your history." The transmission ended. Within hours, it had been received by every major civilization in the galaxy. On conquered worlds, people whispered about the humans who dared to speak such words. In the halls of the Dominion, officials watched with growing concern as the message spread. Director received a private communication from an encrypted source. The message was brief. "The Confederacy stands ready. When you need us, we will act." She stared at the message in shock. They had been conquered 600 years ago. They had one of the largest populations in the galaxy, if they were preparing to rebel. Similar messages began arriving from other species. Even the Graves, a warrior species that had been defeated in battle 300 years before. All of them were preparing for coordinated uprisings across the galaxy. Earth's resistance had sparked something that the Empire had never faced in its 10,000 years of rule: simultaneous rebellion across multiple worlds. 24 hours after the first battle, new contacts appeared on Earth's sensors. This time, the fleet was much larger. 500 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, arranged in an aggressive attack formation. Admiral watched the new fleet arrive and allowed himself a tired smile. "They're taking us seriously now. That's good. It means we hurt them badly enough to matter." "Sir, we can't fight 500 ships," his tactical officer said. "We barely survived 300. "I know," admitted, "but we don't have to win. We just have to make them regret coming here." On the flagship of the Second Fleet, Warlord studied the planet below. He was older than Fleet Commander and far more experienced. His scales bore scars from 100 battles. He had personally conquered 15 species over his lifetime. "The humans are clever," he admitted to his second-in-command. "But cleverness has limits. We will not make mistakes. We will not underestimate them. We will crush them with overwhelming force." "Should we begin orbital bombardment?" his second asked. "No," decided. We will land ground troops. The Emperor wants the planet intact for colonization. Besides, I want to see these humans up close. I want to understand what makes them think they can challenge the Dominion. As the fleet moved into position around Earth, humanity prepared for the invasion. Citizens who had never held weapons before trained with rifles. Engineers built defensive fortifications in cities. Scientists worked desperately to develop any weapon that might give them an edge. An admiral, standing amid the ruins of humanity's orbital defenses, sent one final message to his ships. They're coming, but we're ready. Show them what humans do when someone tries to take away our home. The second battle for Earth was about to begin, and this time they were prepared for resistance. What they weren't prepared for was the fury of a species fighting for its survival on its own world. The Second Fleet began its assault exactly as Warlord had planned. Energy beams lanced down from orbit, striking at military installations that had been marked by their sensors. Explosions blossomed across every continent as bases, airfields, and command centers were destroyed. But something was wrong. Warlord, we are detecting unusual readings from the planet's surface, the sensor officer reported. Energy signatures that match our own shield technology. Frowned, impossible. The humans don't have our shield technology. Then the first bombardment beam hit the shield network that engineer Minu had constructed over the past day. It wasn't a perfect replica of shields. Minu had only had limited time and resources. But it was enough to disperse 30% of the incoming energy, turning city-destroying strikes into merely devastating ones. They are learning too quickly, muttered. Begin landing operations. I want troops on the ground within the hour. Drop ships launched from the fleet by the thousands. Each craft carried 50 soldiers, genetically engineered warriors bred specifically for combat. They descended through Earth's atmosphere in perfect formation, targeting major population centers. General watched the landing craft approach from his command bunker beneath Seoul. He had spent the past day preparing the city for invasion. Every street had been mapped. Every building had been designated as either a defensive position or a trap. The civilian population had been evacuated to deep shelters, except for those who had volunteered to fight. All units hold fire until they're committed, commanded. Let them land. Let them think they've secured the area. Then we make them pay for every meter. The first dropships touched down in the center of Seoul. The rear ramps lowered, and the alien soldiers emerged. Each warrior stood 9 feet tall, armored in dark purple battle suits that enhanced their already formidable strength. They carried energy weapons that could vaporize a human with a single shot. The commander surveyed the empty streets and activated his communication device. City appears abandoned. We are advancing to secure the area. They made it 3 blocks before the ambush began. Windows that appeared empty suddenly filled with human soldiers. Roadways that seemed clear erupted with explosives. Buildings that looked abandoned became fortified positions. They found themselves in a killing zone designed specifically for them. Human rifles cracked, firing armor-piercing rounds at close range. Grenades arced through the air, detonating among the tightly packed formations. And most devastatingly, canisters of Doctor's chemical weapon were deployed, releasing gases that caused the soldiers to collapse, gasping and disoriented. Fall back, the commander ordered, shocked by the ferocity of the attack. Regroup at the landing zone. But the landing zone was no longer safe. Human demolition teams had planted explosives while they were advancing. The drop ships exploded in massive fireballs, trapping the ground forces in hostile territory. Similar scenes played out across the planet. In New York, troops found themselves in urban warfare against an enemy that used the city itself as a weapon. In Mumbai, human forces collapsed buildings onto advancing columns. In Lagos, tunnels beneath the city allowed human soldiers to appear and disappear like ghosts. They had expected resistance. What they got was a nightmare. In orbit, Captain prepared the Resilience for what he knew would be a suicide mission. The ship was barely functional, held together by patches and desperation. But it could still fly, and it still worked. "We're going to ram the flagship," he told his remaining crew. "Anyone who wants to evacuate can do so now. I won't think less of you." Not a single crew member left their post. "Then let's show them what humans do when we've got nothing left to lose," said. The Resilience, along with 6 other critically damaged human ships, began a coordinated attack run on the flagship. They didn't try to avoid enemy fire. They didn't maneuver defensively. They simply accelerated directly toward their target, firing every weapon they had. Warlord watched the human ships approach and realized their intention. "All point defense batteries, target those vessels. Stop them." Energy beams lashed out, tearing into the human ships. The destroyer Courageous exploded, its reactor breaching. The frigate Defiant lost half its hull but kept coming. The corvette Phoenix was cut in two, its front section continuing forward on momentum alone. But the Resilience survived long enough to close the distance. Watched his shields fail, felt his ship shudder as weapons tore it apart, and smiled. "For Earth," he whispered, and triggered the ramming protocol. The Resilience struck the flagship's shields at maximum velocity. The human ship's armored prow, reinforced with every bit of metal they could weld to it, punched through the energy barrier. The impact was catastrophic. Both ships shuddered as metal tore and reactors overloaded. The Resilience died, taking half of its crew with it. But the flagship's command section was destroyed. Its shields were down, and its reactor was failing. Warlord found himself in emergency evacuation, his command staff dead around him. He stared at the wreckage of his flagship in disbelief. The humans had destroyed it with nothing but determination and a broken ship. On the ground, Lieutenant led a desperate attack against a landing site. Her new fighter was a civilian aircraft hastily converted for combat. It had no shields, minimal armor, and weapons pulled from destroyed military craft. But it could fly, and that was enough. She dove through anti-aircraft fire, her falling one by one to enemy defenses. Didn't waver. She had one missile left, a chemical weapon designed by Dr. The target was an ammunition depot that was supplying their ground forces. "This is for everyone we've lost," she said, and fired. The missile struck true. The chemical payload detonated, igniting the munitions in a chain reaction that destroyed 3 city blocks and crippled this ground resupply operation in the entire region. Fighter, damaged by the blast, spiraled toward the ground. She ejected at the last second, parachuting into the ruins of the city. As she landed hard among the rubble, she saw human soldiers rushing to her position. "Can you still fight?" one of them asked. Grinned through the pain of a broken arm. "Give me a rifle." The battle raged for 3 days. The, expecting a quick victory, found themselves mired in a grinding war of attrition. Every building was a fortress. Every street was a trap. The humans fought with a creativity and desperation that they had never encountered. On the 3rd day, something unprecedented happened. The Confederacy, 600 light-years away, rose in open rebellion. Their uprising was coordinated and devastating. Garrisons across worlds were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The news spread instantly. Similar rebellions began. Then the species that had been conquered centuries ago rose up simultaneously, inspired by humanity's defiance. The empire, which had ruled unchallenged for 10,000 years, suddenly found itself fighting rebellions on 100 worlds. Their forces were stretched thin, their supply lines disrupted, their reputation for invincibility shattered. Emperor received the reports with cold horror. This was not just a war anymore. This was an existential threat to the entire dominion. The conquered species had learned that resistance was possible. They had learned that they could be beaten. And they had learned it from humans. On Earth, Admiral made a decision that would define the final phase of the battle. The remaining human ships, all 12 of them, formed up for one last coordinated strike. They transmitted their plan to the galaxy, to every species watching. "This is our final attack," said in his broadcast. "We have given everything we have. Most of us won't survive the next hour, but we want the galaxy to remember this. Freedom is worth dying for. Dignity is worth fighting for. And no empire, no matter how powerful, has the right to take those things away." Director, standing in the ruins of the government bunker, added her own message. "To the species watching across the galaxy, you have the power, you always had it. The ruled through fear, through making you believe resistance was impossible. We have shown that it's not. Whether we win or lose today, the Empire will never be the same. You have seen their weakness. Use that knowledge." The 12 human ships attacked the Second Fleet in a coordinated assault that military historians would study for centuries. They didn't try to survive. They didn't plan for retreat. They simply fought with everything they had left. Ships rammed. Reactors were deliberately overloaded. Crews set their vessels on collision courses and evacuated at the last second. It was chaos and desperation transformed into a coherent battle plan. The fleet, already demoralized by the ground war and the news of galaxy-wide rebellions, broke. Ships began withdrawing without orders. Commanders who had never experienced defeat didn't know how to handle the situation. Warlord, aboard an emergency command vessel, watched his fleet disintegrate. He had fought for 1,000 years. He had conquered 15 species. But he had never faced an enemy like this, an enemy that simply refused to accept defeat. "All ships withdraw," he ordered, the words tasting like poison. "We are leaving this cursed system." The Second Fleet retreated, leaving behind thousands of ground troops who were soon overwhelmed by human forces. The greatest military power in the galaxy had been driven away by a primitive species that should have surrendered after the first attack. As the ships disappeared into faster-than-light travel, Earth fell silent. The battle was over. Humanity had survived. The cost had been terrible. 5 of Earth's 12 remaining ships were destroyed in the final attack. 30,000 military personnel had died. Millions of civilians were killed in the bombardment and ground fighting. Entire cities lay in ruins. But humanity was free. Admiral stood in the wreckage of the orbital command station, looking down at Earth. The planet was burning, but it was still there, still home. Director joined him via communication link. "We won," she said quietly. "No," corrected gently. "We survived. There's a difference. We'll come back eventually, but next time we'll be ready, and next time we won't be alone." Across the galaxy, the rebellions continued. The Empire fought desperately to maintain control, but the damage was done. Species that had been conquered for centuries were fighting back, using tactics they'd learned from watching humanity's defense. The Emperor sat on his throne, ancient and furious, as reports of defeat after defeat arrived. His empire was crumbling, and it had all started with one small, stubborn species that refused to kneel. Engineer Minu worked in his laboratory, already planning new weapons and defenses for the inevitable next invasion. Doctor analyzed biology, searching for more weaknesses. General trained new soldiers, teaching them the guerrilla tactics that had worked so well. Lieutenant, her arm in a cast, volunteered to train the next generation of fighter pilots. And Captain, who had miraculously survived the Resilience's destruction in an emergency pod, was already designing a new class of warship, one built specifically to fight the Ambassador received a communication from the Confederacy. It was an invitation to a council, a gathering of all the species fighting against rule. Humanity was invited as equals, as brothers in arms. "We would be honored to attend," replied. Months later, historians across the galaxy would mark this as the beginning of the end for the Dominion. A 10,000-year empire had been brought to its knees by a species that had only reached space a few generations ago. But the humans knew the truth. They hadn't won through superior technology or greater numbers. They had won through one simple fact. They had confronted the most powerful empire in the galaxy and refused to surrender. And in doing so, they had taught the galaxy the most important lesson of all, that freedom, once defended, could never truly be taken away. The war wasn't over. There would be more battles, more sacrifices, more losses. But humanity faced the future with courage, knowing they had changed the galaxy forever. They had stood against the darkness and survived, and that was enough.